The 1988 US presidential elections were notably negative in their tone, despite the fact that the victory or the winner was clear. We can say that they started the series of negative or mudslinging election campaigns in the United States history, at least at the federal level. Of course, negative campaigning had been by no means unknown. Even such an early presidential election as the 1796 presidential election had featured, 1796 or 1800 election had featured notable negative campaigning by activists of the first US vice president, and then the second US president, John Adams, and then the man who would succeed him as president, Thomas Jefferson. Lee Atwater, who was the campaign manager in terms of the media of the Republican candidate Vice President George Bush, was responsible for much mudslinging on the Republican side, or at least planning it. The interesting thing is, however, that the Democratic candidate, Governor Michael Dukakis of Massachusetts, took an early lead in the opinion polls. One poll taken probably after the Democratic National Convention in July 1988 showed him at 50%, Vice President Bush at 33%, and the rest undecided. However, after the Republican National Convention in August 1988, Bush pulled even and then took the lead. The two presidential televised presidential debates, the first one held in late September 1988 and the second one in early October of that year, did not change the voters' mindsets too much. Dukakis, according to a Canadian political scientist, James John Guy, may have won the first debate, but most observers and viewers believe that Bush won the second debate, and then soon he was enjoying a double-digit lead, that is 10% upwards. Dukakis was able to narrow Bush's lead on the final days of the campaign with his populist theme, "I'm on your side," but that was too little, too late. As political scientist Guy said in his political science textbook, as a man who had compared the presidential election to a marathon, Dukakis proved to be too late with his sprint. One notable issue, of course, were taxes. After two relatively prosperous presidential terms, the two relatively prosperous presidential terms of outgoing President Ronald Reagan, who, because of the 22nd Amendment to the US Constitution, could not seek a third term. The issue was whether taxes could or should be raised, although Reagan had in 1983, in order to save the funding for the social security system, that is old age pensions and so forth, for elderly Americans, had agreed to rather massive tax increases. George Bush kept repeating at the campaign stops, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and accused his opponent, Governor Dukakis, of having often raised taxes in Massachusetts and of always wanting to raise taxes and then increase spending or something similar. Governor Dukakis countered that he wanted to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, to provide millions more Americans with good jobs at good wages. He also tried to showcase the Massachusetts miracle of the 1980s, whereby many thousands of Massachusetts workers had been recycled out of the traditional industrial jobs into high technology and other service jobs. Despite the fact that the Democrats were able to retain their majorities in the House of Representatives and the Senate, they were unable to prevail over the Republicans in the presidential elections. One of the features of the rather negative and lackluster campaign was the voter turnout, which was only 50.2% of the eligible voters. Of course, always a higher percentage of those actually registered to vote, because every 2 years at the federal level, when there are elections, millions of voting age Americans do not bother to register to vote because of the general level of apathy and cynicism, which is so prevalent nowadays in the modern, even well-established Western democracies. Anyway, Vice President Bush received some 48,887,000 votes, or 53.4% of the total, carrying 40 states with 426 electors. Governor Dukakis received only about 41,809,000 votes, or 45.6% of the total, winning 10 states and Washington, D.C. Originally, he was to receive 112 electors, but one of his electors proved faithless and voted instead for the vice presidential candidate, Senator Lloyd Bentsen of Texas, reducing Dukakis' total number of electors to 111.